Hello and welcome to our Financial Literacy Education series, where we help you get a better understanding about your money, become more engaged with your money, and make better decisions about your money. My name's Corin Jacker, I'm from Priority One Wealth Management Group. In today's episode, we're going to continue our retirement planning conversation with a focus on aged care considerations. So in relation to aged care, we all need to probably consider it at some stage throughout our retirement. Most people will be needing to go into aged care, they'll know somebody that's going into aged care, and they may be left living alone as a result of somebody going into aged care. So it's going to be an issue for most retirees to consider. One point I will make though, is if you're just going into retirement, don't worry too much about this. There's not a lot of financial strategies you need to put in place in anticipation of what might happen in potentially 15 or 20 or 25 years' time. So we just need to have an awareness of it, have a consideration of what the potential implications are, but in the first phase of retirement, when you're just retiring, don't worry too much about it would be my key message. So let's go through the process of aged care, what happens, and some of the financial implications that might result in that. So the first thing that occurs is there'll be an aged care assessment. And what happens there is they've made the assessment at that point in time that this person requires care. And in this case, we're going to make the assumption that they're going into accommodation care and not home care. So home care is part of this conversation, and it has very similar aspects in terms of the assessment in relation to that. But in this case, we're focusing on probably the one with the larger implication, which is going into aged care accommodation. So what typically happens, and something to keep in mind about this process, is that often happens quite urgently and quite unexpectedly. So we often come across the experience where somebody has gone into hospital after a fall or an accident, and they've been told they're not able to return home. All of a sudden, the family and loved ones need to quickly find accommodation. So once that assessment's done, the biggest challenge for some people can be actually finding that bed. So that's the first thing to do, and that can depend on family location, financial limitations, and other aspects in terms of availability of what's available in your area. Once we've found a location and a bed, the first thing to do, or part of that process, is to look at the published amounts that are required on either the facility's website or the government's aged care website. So all the facilities are required to put their fees and charges on their website so you get a good understanding of what a bed will cost. Now from that, there'll be an accommodation payment, typically quoted in the form of a lump sum. And that accommodation payment typically might be maybe, let's say, $500,000. So that's the first fee that will be required. Now, there is the choice in regarding to how you pay that fee. So some people can choose to pay it as a lump sum, or some people can pay it as a daily fee. And that daily fee is effectively a reflection of the interest costs that the facility can charge because you haven't paid the lump sum. Then alongside that, everybody pays a basic daily care fee. And then alongside that, there's a means tested fee that will apply to some individuals. And that's income and asset tested, very similar to the Centrelink age pension assessment with a few variations on it. In relation to that means tested fee, there are some caps in terms of an annual cap and a lifetime cap that might be applicable. So we need to get an understanding of what might apply in terms of these daily fees, but not only in the very short term, but also over the medium to longer term as well. And then most facilities will charge for additional services, or what they might call luxuries, that don't apply to all the accommodation recipients, but might be just there if you require those additional services. So in terms of what you need to get advice around, so the first thing to do when looking at your situation, if you're going into aged care or loved ones going to aged care, is to review your entire financial situation. The main thing most people need to consider is what's happening with the home. So if you own your home, the first thing to do is establish, is there going to be somebody remaining in the home, which obviously determines what the requirements are for it. But if there's not someone remaining in the home, we need to determine, do we sell the home? Do we retain the home and just leave it as it is? Do we rent out the home? Do we borrow against the home with a reverse mortgage? That's becoming a bit less common these days, but things like Centrelink have their pension loan scheme, which is a similar arrangement. So do we look at those sorts of arrangements that use the home as capital to extract income from the home in other ways? Once we've worked out what to do with the home, we also need to work out how much cash flow do we need to cover the daily care fees and how will that be provided. So in terms of our previous episode, we talked about traditional retirement income sources. So there might be an allocated pension, there might be some age pension being paid. And in this case, this is one area where we might need to consider an annuity. And the reason for that is the annuity has some Centrelink means testing concessions available to it. So it can improve that means tested daily care fee outcome. Also too, if we're keeping the home and renting it out, that can be factored into the equation as well. And there are other things that are a little bit more complicated, like things like getting an investment bond within a private trust company. That has certain Centrelink implications as well that might improve your financial position. So we need to get a good understanding of what's happening with your existing assets and what can we do in relation to paying the fees, either lump sum or the daily care fees or both. And what we're trying to do here is optimise your financial position. And it's not necessarily optimising one particular aspect of your financial position. We might not be interested in just maximising whatever Centrelink benefit you might be able to retain. We need to look at the whole financial position in its entirety. And importantly, we need to consider the estate planning consideration as well, because whatever decisions we make here may have implications on what the estate eventually will inherit as well. So that needs to be considered as part of the conversation. So, in a quick summary of what we just talked about, we talked about the payment option, whether it's a refundable accommodation deposit or a lump sum or a daily accommodation payment, which is the daily fee, along with the other means tested fee, the basic daily care fee or the luxuries fee that might be applying. We need to consider whether we're selling or keeping the home, and obviously there's going to be personal and financial preferences there in relation to who's remaining at the home. And even if there's no one remaining at the home, the beneficiaries of the estate might have preferences in terms of what they'd like to do in terms of retaining the home or selling the home. The important thing about aged care, and this was just a brief summary today to give you an idea of some of the implications and some of the issues that you need to think about and might be needing to apply. The first thing to do is try and plan for this as early as possible. And as I alluded to earlier in the episode, this is sometimes an area that can be thrown on people with a fair bit of urgency. But if we just have a bit of an understanding of the what ifs might occur earlier on, then at least we're prepared. It's important to involve the family because one, they might be implicated in terms of from a beneficiary perspective. Two, depending on your capacity to make decisions, they might be acting as power of attorney arrangements, so they might need to be involved in terms of what your preferences are. And that can involve, the power of attorney arrangements can involve your financial decisions, so that's part of that decision of whether to sell the home, what investments we're going to use. It can be the medical decisions and obviously the living arrangements in terms of finding a bed in the first place. So the most important thing I think in terms of aged care planning for retirees, the key takeaways is if you're in the first phase of retirement, just have an awareness of this, but don't get too concerned about it. And as I said, there's not a lot of strategic decisions you can make to prepare yourself for this situation because we just don't know the timing for most people. The second key takeaway that I have for clients is that the implication of what can happen here is often a lot less than what people expect. There is lots of flexibility in terms of whether we pay lump sum or daily fees, so that can be impacted by what the financial position of the client is. It also can be impacted by how long we think this aged care requirement is going to be in place for. So it's quite flexible in terms of what you can do. And the third thing to take away is that the actual cash flow impact may not be as big as we think as well. And I'll give you a quick example. So we had a recent case where someone had to go into aged care. It was a couple, one member was going into aged care, the second member was staying in the home. So we had a couple that was, before going to aged care, were living off about $65,000 a year as a couple. When one went into aged care, we established that the daily care fees in total were going to be about $45,000 for the daily care fees. Now, on top of that, the person receiving the aged care won't need a lot of other money for their living standards, maybe a few $1,000s a year. The person remaining in the home, though, still had their needs to be met. And for them to live in the home by themselves, it was going to be about $35,000 a year. So all of a sudden, a couple living off $65,000 a year now needed about $80,000 a year. So about $15,000 a year difference. One of the things that occurred in this example, though, is that they were then treated from a Centrelink perspective, instead of a couple who own their own home, they were treated as a couple separated by illness, which basically means they're entitled to the single pension each rather than the combined couple pension. And that simply means they got an increase in their age pension entitlement. So even though they had an increase in cost, some of that was absorbed by Centrelink differences as well. So yes, there was still a deficit that we were able to fund through cash and other liquid assets that we had available, but we were confident that we had enough cash and liquid assets available to cover that deficit for the time frame we felt that was going to be in place here for this aged care participant. So it is a complex area. It is one where you're likely to need to get advice. It's one where if you preferably can get advice and an understanding earlier and sooner rather than later, it can make a bit of a difference. But as I said, don't worry too much about it. It is a flexible arrangement at the moment, and there are often solutions that are workable for everyone. Thank you. Goodbye.